Díomh Galéir agus Fáilte an Sáineacht. You are very, very welcome, one and all, to this, our Sinn Féin meeting and conversation on Brexit. Welcome to all of our viewers and participants on Facebook, on Twitter and on YouTube. Please, in the course of our discussion, post your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, and we will get back to all of you if we can, but certainly as many of you as is possible. I'm joined here this evening by the two Chris's. That is to say, Chris Mack and Chris H. Chris McManus, MEP for Midlands Northwest, a good Sligo man, and now our man in Brussels joins us. You're very, very welcome, Chris. Great to see you. And of course, Chris Hazard, MP, elected for the constituency of South Down and our party spokesperson on Brexit. So both are very well informed and indeed working very hard with the rest of us in the Sinn Féin team on all matters Brexit related. So here we are, and it is less than 100 days to D-Day, to the end of the transition period, at the moment in which Brexit really takes effect. And all of you tuned in this evening, I'm sure, will have followed all of the events across the water, the Tories' latest ploy in their internal market bill, where they've tried to step outside the withdrawal agreement, tried to, undermine the protections in what's called the protocol, the very protections that we secured for our island. So we want to talk about all of that. I'm going to ask both of the Chris's to bring us up to date with what's happening here across the water at a European level. And I suppose, above all, we want to talk about what happens in the future, in the immediate future, but also in the medium term. And no conversation can be had about Brexit and the border and partition without, of course, us having a conversation also about Irish unity. So, where to start? Chris H, MP, can you just enlighten us as to what on earth is going on with the Tories this time? What are Boris and his crew at?
Yeah, no problem. And look, I suppose, first of all, it's great to join yourself and Chris this evening. It's hard to believe, but it's, after 3 years of negotiations, meetings, campaigns, we've had the theatre and the circus at Westminster. Boris Johnson and the Tories over the last number of weeks, nearly as if they've only read the withdrawal agreement and the protocol for the first time, have now decided all of a sudden that they don't like what they signed up to. So after trumpeting this deal during the recent election campaign and celebrating it as the basis of a oven-ready trade deal, he went on to win a general election on it, for example. This is his deal. However, what he has failed to do is live up to the realities of the protocol are not what he simply agreed to. And I think it's, and having met Boris lately with Michelle in Hillsborough Castle, the guy doesn't do detail well at all. I don't think he has any understanding of the withdrawal agreement and the protocol. Everybody will remember his Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, admitting that he had never read the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think Boris would say it publicly, but I would hazard a guess, excuse the pun, that he hasn't read it either. So, throughout this year, the British government have been abusing the process of implementation negotiations with the European Union or in the joint committee around how does the protocol work in reality. How do they get past the concerns around, exit summary declarations and trade and all the nuts and bolts that need talked about. And they've tried to use that to renegotiate a deal that has been signed and delivered. And that's led us to the trouble that we're in at the minute.
Chris, just in really simple terms, because I'm really aware it's for those of us that are like full-time in politics, you get into all of the technicalities and the nuts and bolts of it. But in very simple terms, for the purposes of our conversation, just explain to people what the protocol actually means.
Well, I suppose at a very basic level, in the simple truth of it all, Brexit means divergence. It's the whole point of Brexit is, Britain and the Tories and Boris Johnson, they want to do things differently than life under the EU. They want to diverge from all the protections and the regulations that, we've come to be used to and celebrate, and workers' rights and environmental standards, animal welfare, example. And of course, central to all of this is the fact that here in the island of Ireland, we very much are European and consider ourselves European. And so we have put forward from the very outset the idea that the people of the North, our businesses, our community, our young people, we require a special status. So it's went through different forms. We had special status. We then had, the backstop, the front stop, and the protocol. And I suppose at a very basic level, they're all ways about how we protect our rights going forward. Because as we all know, there's no mandate on the island of Ireland for Brexit. We voted to remain. Being a part of Europe is fundamental, not just to who we are as European citizens, but of course to the supply chains for our local businesses, the border communities, fundamental. If you take the likes of the Daisy Hill Hospital, up to 20% of staff who work in the Daisy Hill Hospital come from the south. So all of those protections that need in place, that you can't simply just walk away. That our peace process is, based upon the idea that we would never return to the idea of a hard border. That simply cannot be the way of it. Now, the British government have previously acknowledged that, that's a principle they want to deliver, but they failed wholeheartedly in all of their policies to be able to live up to that. And where we are at the minute, and that's why Europe, the Irish government, ourselves in partnership with Dublin, and also importantly, I think in recent weeks, the various figures from America. We've had Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of Congress, and Richie Neal, the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, a very powerful committee. That's the committee in Congress that signs off in any future trade deal with Britain. And of course, with Joe Biden and others talk about how the rights and the Good Friday Agreement cannot be trampled upon in the weeks ahead.
And I mean, that's a really important point, isn't it? That people in the North voted to remain. And even all of us, let's face it, we as Irish Republicans have big criticisms and critiques of the European project because in many ways it's lost its way. But we have always known that whatever those criticisms are, a Tory Brexit certainly is not the answer to the problems that we have. And I think people have taken it very, very badly, naturally, that a government in London, Boris Johnson, based in number 10 Downing Street, can call the shots in such a way that causes so much potential damage to our island. And I mean, none more so, Chris Mack, than in the event that there is a no deal Brexit, and that's looking like a real possibility now. That we'd have a no deal Brexit, and I mean the implications for Ireland are just so serious.
Well, I think actually, the chances of a no deal Brexit have probably risen somewhat over the last number of weeks. Maddening thing about, as Chris already said, the withdrawal agreement and Irish protocol is that, the EU and the British government, it went through the British Parliament, they signed it, they held it up as a central plank and secured a massive majority. And now they're not only backtracking, they're seeking to breach not one but two international agreements. So yes, it is quite possible. I don't like talking it up because one doesn't want to be pessimistic about our own island, but it is a possibility, and it's going to have a massive impact on the economy all across Ireland. Businesses are, those streamlined trading arrangements between EU member states and import and export tariffs will probably be imposed. And it means just more paperwork, more red tape for businesses that want to import and export to the EU. I think, in fact, if I can recall that previously, I think when she was Minister of State for European Affairs, Minister McEntee indicated that 1.35 billion annually is what the tariffs would cost to the south if no deal was reached. And when you consider, from my perspective over here in Brussels, we heard it being talked up, the Brexit Recovery Fund, it's only going to be 5 billion. And that sounds like a lot, but it has to be parsed out amongst 27 member states who'll all be arguing for their own corner. So there are massive problems. Even last week we heard about these massive queues of thousands of lorries that are going to be clogging up the roads around Dover, that you're going to need a permit to get into Kent. And when you consider there's 150,000, I think, Irish lorries that use the British land bridge every year, and that equates to, I think, about 80% of our exports to the continent. There's major issues there for hauliers, and in fact, the Road Haulage Association said that trade could be impacted in such a way that prices could double for some products. So there's massive problems, coming down the line, and the other, some of the issues around the Internal Markets Bill, about compelling the Assembly and the Executive to lower food safety, animal welfare, environmental standards. Does anyone actually want to have to eat chlorinated chicken? And we have to recall too that as an MEP for Midlands Northwest, as the Sinn Féin representative, I have a responsibility to represent all 32 counties best I can, and I know that farmers in the north have lost 300 million sterling in CAP funding, and I think one of the things that I've probably noticed over the last while is that there's still, while people within the 6 counties are very much focused and aware of the issues of Brexit, and to quite an extent because of the cross-border and cross-community movement that there is along that border area, there are still people, the further south you go, who still haven't got it into their heads that Brexit's going to affect every single one of us. And, we need to ensure that resonates loudly. Because I'm talking to, since the number of weeks I've been over here, farming organisations from across Ireland, and they're terrified of a hard border. They're terrified it's going to be the last straw for many farming families. And they're critical to rural communities, because I think one fact I can recall from long before Brexit was on the horizon is that a third of farms were already vulnerable, and that's before Brexit and COVID came along. So, there are serious implications ahead. Yeah, the agri-food industry, and I'm sure we might touch on it later on, is one that is really, really worried about the coming weeks and months. I'm on the EU Agri Committee out here, and in terms of, nearly half of the beef that comes from the 26 counties still goes to Britain, a fifth of dairy products, and the dairy products alone to Britain market is a billion per annum. So it's very, very worrying, and people need to start.
And tell me, Chris Mack, what just in your work as an MEP and in Brussels and in Strasbourg, what are people saying to you now? I mean, anytime I have been over, myself and Michelle and others, talking to people in the Commission, or lobbying figures, and and doing meetings with the likes of Michel Barnier and others, it's always struck me that they really get how serious this is for the whole island of Ireland, not just for the north, although obviously for the north, that's the primary concern, because the north is being forced out against the democratic wishes of the people. But it has always struck me from the beginning that they really understood the full implications for our island as a whole. And just tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I have a strong sense that even though politics moves on and Brexit is just one issue amongst many issues, coronavirus, for example, that still Europe gets it, that Ireland needs these protections and that they've held firm.
Absolutely. Like regardless of where people are on the political spectrum, whether they're on the left or going over to the moderate right, there's a kind of a uniform understanding of the importance of Ireland, and to some extent the positivity of the peace process on this island, and the fact that the EU assisted in quite a number of ways, and in terms of assistance and then resources around peace funding and other issues like that, means that over here the peace process is seen as something very special and needs to be protected. So yeah, I know from there's been discussions, the likes of Michel Barnier, and they get it. It's clicked with them. They understand very much the importance. They understand the fragility, and it's actually quite scary to think, and Chris referred to it earlier on, is that officials and elected representatives in Europe from countries far, far away have a better understanding about what's going on in the island of Ireland, the dangers there are to our peace process, the undermining of the Good Friday Agreement, than the British government based in Westminster. So to that extent, it's quite worrisome. They were actually, though, I think there was a sense of, I'm not going to say shock, might be a bit too hard a word, but there was, when the internal markets built up, there was a sense of it was highly unexpected. The understanding of international diplomacy is that when you make an international treaty and an agreement, is that, especially for countries that come from a Western democratic value-based system, is that they stick to it. And then when Boris and the Tory government were willing to just throw the whole thing under the bus, there was that sense of shock out here. And actually, I think it means that the Commission and indeed the wider EU institutions are now doubling down in their forthrightness in ensuring that our agreement and our peace process is protected at all costs.
So, I mean, we're in a very serious situation. Brexit itself, and we said this from the beginning, there is no good Brexit. There is no happy ever after at the end of this. This is bad news. Whither or which, this is bad news. But we're facing into potentially, as we said, maybe the worst possible of scenarios. So Chris, just let's talk a little bit about what Sinn Féin has been doing, because I think viewers need to be aware that we have not been resting on our laurels, far from it, like from the beginning. And I think we have to give a huge amount of credit to Martina Anderson, her time in particular as an MEP, but indeed the whole team at the time. And I'm sure they're still talking about her, Chris Mack.
I have to say, and I'm only out here a matter of weeks, and any MEP I've engaged with who's got an interest in Ireland, one of the first things they ask about straight away is Martina Anderson. And a number of them also reference the resolution that was passed back in 2017, that would state that in the event of Irish unity, there wouldn't be some big preamble in regards to, the 6 counties being incorporated. It would be as seamless as German unification happened back in 1990. So as, while we are at times, we critically engage with the European Union, there is just common agreement out here that in the case that Irish unity becomes a reality, is that, the North will become an immediate part of the European Union, which I think is important for us to reiterate time and time again.
And listen, Chris H., I mean, we're all aware that, Westminster serves British, although let's be honest, English interests really. And in the case of Brexit, is very much dancing to kind of that English nationalist impulse. So any idea that you were going to show up at Westminster and stop Brexit, I think has been shown for the patent nonsense that it always was. But Chris, just talk to us about the British political system and the work of Sinn Féin MPs, but also the MLA and the executive teams, because we've been extremely active.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it goes back to, there's an old protest song, which side are you on? And when it comes to Brexit, it was nearly that approach. There was basically the British government and the British political establishment that became paralysed because of Brexit and the very toxic nature of all of it. And I think, credit to party leadership, yourself, Michelle, Martina, and others when it came to Brexit, that we quickly understood that, we were going to have to be on the side here of the European 27. They were going to represent our interest base. And that's where we had to focus our effort and engagement over the last number of years. We kicked off a really intensive diplomatic offensive from Brussels to London to Dublin, and of course to the US as well, to really put the Good Friday Agreement at the heart of all of this, so that people, European diplomats and people all over the world, when they were looking at Brexit, could see it through the lens of Ireland. That the only media that we're getting was, coming from the right-wing Brexit media in London, that they understood that there was a different dynamic to this. People forget that the first time that Enda Kenny went to Brussels to talk about this, he talked about Scotland and Scottish independence. He never actually talked about Ireland. So it was RTDs and our team that, put special status onto the radar. And I think ever since that, over the last number of years, it's been about then coalescing the forces They're anti-Brexit forces. The majority of people in the north, so the majority of parties, the majority of MLAs, are totally opposed to Brexit, want to work together. That's why this week people will have seen Michelle O'Neill and Colin Eastwood and Claire Bailey and Naomi Long from the pro-Remain parties going to meet with Simon Coveney to talk about the dangers of the internal market bill. And that's why there's been such good engagement with the Scottish National Party, with the opposition parties in London. And even this week, when we looked at the internal market bill, which of course, and I'll spare people the detail, but it's a full frontal attack on the Good Friday Agreement and the withdrawal agreement. But the powers of Stormont as well, and Chris has alluded to some of them there, being able to just simply set aside, rigorous environmental standards that the Stormont might want to have in place. But we're seeing, the Tory party have brought forward amendments on human rights, where they want to set aside the European Convention on Human Rights. If that goes forward in the next couple of days, again, what we're seeing here is a Tory party, and this should come as no surprise to people. We've seen since 2010, we've had a decade of destruction from the Tory party, where they've undermined the Good Friday Agreement at every turn. So I think what's been really good, our approach, is building that coalition of forces now to say, no, our peace process has to be protected at all times. Settlement, is very, very sensitive to these types of changes. There's no logic to Brexit. We know that. If you look at the very toxic environment that it stemmed from and what it's creating now, the rise of xenophobia, the rise of racism, and unfortunately fascism in places in Britain today, there's no sense to be had in any of that. That's why people ask us all the time, what do you think Boris Johnson's going to do next? Where do you see this landing in the next couple of weeks? My opinion changes nearly by the day, because it doesn't really matter what's happening in Ireland or what's happening in Europe. We know the bottom line. We know the protections that have to be in place. It comes down to Downing Street. It comes down to what sort of deal or no deal does Boris Johnson want to walk away with here. And that's a very dangerous place for all of our rights entitlements to be sitting in. And that's why it's so important then the European Union and the Irish government stand very firm in all of this.
Absolutely. And I think the simple truth is, not alone can we not predict what Boris Johnson thinks or might think tomorrow or next week. Sometimes when I look at the kind of chaotic approach to this, I wonder, does the man even know himself, or is this very much at times a wing and a prayer? So we can't control that, and we can't. The truth is, if the Tories are intent on a destructive course of action, of course we can challenge that, and we challenge that night and day, but we can't stop them. I mean, those are their calls. But what we can do, and what I think we have been very effective in doing, is mustering and rallying opinion across the continent, and I through the institutions and the different political groupings and so on. But also in the United States of America. I met today with Mick Mulvaney, who is the envoy, the special envoy from the White House. We had a good meeting. And he has set out again very, very clearly the thing that Richie Neal and Nancy Pelosi and other very senior figures in American politics have set out, that as far as they are concerned, there can't be any damage or disruption to the Good Friday Agreement, no hardening of the border, because if there is, there will be no trade deal between the US and Britain. And that's very, very important. So, but let me say this as well. I mean, it strikes me that Brexit has done a lot of things and has created a lot of danger for us. But it's done something else as well. It has put the border in Ireland front and centre in the political debate. And it means now that the border isn't just our problem. The border now is a European problem, isn't it, Chris Mack? I mean, and I think they know that.
Yeah, absolutely. The possibility of there being a frontier, causes so many problems over here in regards to, as I said, the free movement of goods and labour across the border if the Irish Protocol isn't put in place. But I'm going back, and the words you said earlier on regarding the Tories and about Boris, and I don't think that it's Boris that's actually the the ringmaster regards this. It's your man Donald Cummings, and he's like that. And there's a line in a Batman film where some people just want to watch the world burn, and that's the irrationality of the people you follow. It's just like he just wants to throw the cards in the air and let them fall where they may. And that's such a narrow worldview that they have, that everything is only, what does Middle England want? What plays well to that gallery of former, UKIP voters and stuff like that. Look, bringing it all back, we have this core problem of Brexit and how it's going to impact on us as an island society and an economy. And I think we've articulated from start to finish. There's one clear answer to the madness that's Brexit, and that's simply Irish unity. And I think more and more people are beginning to talk about it and articulate. Look, our strategic objectives are the most viable from our, we've always said that by which our politics and objectives can be advanced. We're motivated by that ultimate aim to build an Ireland of equals, of economic and social justice, of national unity, based on our proclamation. And, we've already mentioned earlier that the Good Friday Agreement is an international agreement, and that is the vehicle for achieving Irish unity through simultaneous referendums on the island of Ireland. And it's become, as I said, obvious. There would have been a time years ago where if we talked about Irish unity, people would have said, oh, look, there's the Shinners talking amongst themselves. It's moved well beyond the broader Republican community this time. Partition has failed. There's a realisation social and demographic changes are taking place. There's a greater level of politicisation of many sections in the community. And we've become, as a society, more focused on, being rights-based and being a pluralist community. So that conversation around the border poll is very much alive. We know it here in Brussels, where we're in regular contact with those key people involved in the negotiations. They'll tell you straight up that their first instinctive reaction of many of them to Brexit was that the best way to allow the North, who voted by a majority, to remain was through Irish unity. They just seen that as a common sense approach. And I'll tell you one thing, and while I've been only a few weeks out in Brussels, I've been 6 months in a room in Sligo trying to carry out my work as best as I can as an MEP. But the one sense I've got from communications with MEPs is there's a latent support for Irish unity around the EU. And when Britain was a member of the EU, there was that reluctance of, we're not going to say anything that might upset the government of a member state. But now that Britain is out, there's many in the EU who now consider Irish unity as not only being desirable, but probably to some point inevitable. And I referenced Germany earlier on. The Commission and the institutions has always worn the reunification of Germany as a badge of honour and as what they see as an exemplar of the good of the European project. So that talk is turning to how the EU might best support Irish unification. You're not going to hear it being shouted from the rooftops, but that conversation is going on, and obviously we need to be raising the issue that if unity was to happen, and as I said earlier, the EU has a position that in the case of a vote for unity, that the 6 counties would immediately become part of the European Union, and we need to start talking about the possibility of looking at what would be financial programmes, similar to EU peace and reconciliation, but on a much, much faster scale and, in terms of direct and indirect funding. So like all those things are there simmering under the surface out here at an EU level. And obviously one of my roles as an MEP and along with the Sinn Féin team out here is to make sure that that's as high up the agenda as possibly as we can, and it won't be for trying.
And Chris, it's true to say also that in Britain itself, the Brexit dilemma and all of the politics around it and all of the disruption and confusion, and for many people, a late realisation of what this was going to mean for Ireland and how potentially damaging it would be economically, but also in terms of the peace settlement. That's also pressed on that conversation, isn't it, in the kind of the political debate and conversation in Britain?
Yeah, absolutely. During the Brexit campaign, I think it's a fair criticism to say that not just the Tories and not just the Brexiteers, but the media as a whole were completely tone deaf to the interests and the needs of Ireland in all of this, despite all of the opposition here to Brexit. We simply don't register when it comes to political debate at Westminster. I think even Westminster has shown a sneering contempt for devolution. If you look at what's happening at the minute in Scotland, and actually increasingly in Wales as well, with the language of the Welsh government in recent times, there's a real growing anger that no matter what answer is given by the people, the answer back from Westminster is no. So for example, and that we have historic parallels here in Ireland, of course, as we all know this. In 1918, the Irish people voted for freedom. The British government says, well, you can have partition. In 2016, we voted to remain, and the British government says, no, you're getting Brexit. Every time we have an election, the people here vote for local candidates, but we're landed with a Tory Prime Minister. So at some point, we have to say, this political dispensation that we have is not in our interest. It's not in anybody's interest on this island, and we have to look to do something about it. So, increasingly now, and you see all of the polling in Scotland, the people of Scotland are deciding that they want to be able to, take those decisions for themselves. And increasingly, as has been alluded to in this conversation, that's happening in Ireland as well. There's no doubt about it. Brexit, it's not the cause of increasing demands, but there's no doubt it's an accelerant. And it's just created an entirely different dynamic. I don't think that should come as any surprise to people. I think it's always been the case. When you look at the struggle for Irish freedom over decades and centuries, international events and shocks have kind of been the context to political struggle on the island. And people will look back, no doubt, at this time and see Brexit in that light. But I just think we're now at a juncture where people are now starting to ask themselves, we have a choice. It's time to open our eyes here. What sort of a future do you want for yourself, for your family, and your community? Do you want endless Tory rule? Do we really need another decade of destruction? Do we need, another decade of Tory austerity, or is there a different way to do things? Can we prioritise, saving our climate? Can we prioritise investing in good public services? One of the big worries out of this internal market bill, for example, is this is a signal from the British government to potential trading partners that no matter what a locally devolved administration might say about food safety standards, they're going to make sure that they can ship in hormone-induced beef and chlorinated chicken and all the rest of it. And that should serve as a big, big warning to all of us that this British government and the Tories and Boris Johnson are more than willing to set aside, democratic mandates for their own narrow interests. And that should be a warning to us all. But it should also be a chance now to say, okay, we need to do things differently.
And I just think it's been so interesting by way of response to Brexit. Well, I suppose a couple of things, that despite the differences, and they are very, very dramatic differences between ourselves, say, and a number of the other political parties here in the South, as it's called, we have agreed that Brexit is a bad thing, and we have agreed absolutely that the island as a whole, the whole island, north, south, east and west, runs real dangers and has to be protected. And in the north, it's just been so interesting to see the way in which the kind of pro-Remain, anti-Brexit parties, again, very different in outlook, but how they've managed to come together, and how Michelle O'Neill, as joint head of government, has really led that kind of drive. And people say that we can't afford unity, which of course is not true. We know that we actually can't afford partition, and if anything else, I think Brexit screams that out, doesn't it, Chris Mack? Just the fact that so long as the country is partitioned, we're so vulnerable in so many fundamental ways to either Tory austerity, as Chris H was saying, or this kind of English nationalist inspired Brexit. And it really robs us of the opportunity that I want us to grab with both hands to build first class services, a prosperous economy, wire in people's citizens' rights, irrespective of creed, class, colour, and to build that new Ireland. That's really within our grasp now.
Absolutely, and look, to me, the manifesto, that's our guide. It's 104 years old, and the language is slightly dated, but it's the cornerstone of every single thing that we aspire to, and we need to aspire, and that's the problem. Sometimes people talk down, and they use the economic argument in regards to unification of this island. Let's talk it up. Let's be proud of it. The world looks at us and sees us as a great people, and then sometimes they wonder how we've ended up in this place that we are today. After being a colony of Britain, when every other colony of Britain all across the world has freed themselves from the yoke of that imperialism, we're still harnessed to it. As Britain's oldest colony. So, what we need to do is inspire. Like when you look at, let's say, in the likes of America. They see, the Good Friday Agreement as being sacrosanct. And what we need to be ensuring that we hammer home is that the Tories begin to get their heads around that. They need to realise, look, this is the bottom line. And this is one thing that people take away from what we're talking about this evening. They need to realise that a border poll is inevitable. It's just a matter of when. And I think that's the question that we need to be looking to put to the people of Ireland as soon as we possibly can. Let's think big. Let's aspire, let's build a better society. And that means that we have to remove partition from this island.
Here. And just Chris H, to bring you back in, I mean, the government here, the new government in Dublin is establishing this shared island unit, which they couldn't quite bring themselves to call it a united Ireland unit, but let's not fall out over that. I think it's a good thing that they're taking an initiative like that, but we've been arguing the case that the preparation for that referendum that Chris Mack was referring to, that needs to start now. There will be no prizes for those that bury their head in the sand. In fact, I would go so far as to say that that's a very reckless thing to do, in our view.
And Brexit shows you that. And sometimes when these forces are moving, you have to recognise that. You have to become involved in the conversation. Opponents of Scottish independence for years says, no, we can't have that debate. It'll be too divisive and all the rest of it. Nonsense. It was anything but. Town halls were filled with citizens who came out to debate what they wanted their future community to look like and how they wanted politics to govern their lives. And looking in from the outside, it certainly looked like it was like a festival of ideas nearly at sometimes, and that's what we need to see. We of course have our own vision of what we want Ireland to look like going into the future, but there's others who will come around that table and bring different ideas, who will challenge our own orthodoxy and what we want to see, and that's important. And I think that process needs to take place. But you can't have that process if we don't say, this needs to happen. Let's start preparing for it and at least acknowledge that that's where the people are going. I always found it remarkable that, when you were doing media interviews or different types of events in London over the last few years of Brexit, once the camera stopped rolling, the interviewer, whoever you were with, the panelist maybe would say, but sure, we all know the obvious answer to this is Irish unity. And you would say to them, yes, well, we're now approaching a time where you're going to get to talk about that on camera and not have to wait till the camera goes off. Because that's the common sense approach. And all of this, history will say that. Looking back in time, people will say, well, wasn't it obvious that that's what we should be? And I guess we're just now at that crossroads now where people are going to become involved in them conversations.
Thanks so much, Chris Mack and Chris H, for a great conversation. And as we know, we are now faced with the big challenge. We have to hold firm. The government in Dublin has to hold firm to the Good Friday Agreement, to the commitments of the protocol, those protections for our island. We need to rally our allies and those that stand on the same ground as us, defending the Good Friday Agreement, the precious peace that we have built here. And then we need to prepare. Preparation is the order of the day, because the moment will come when hope and history will rhyme again. And when the question will be put to all of us, every man and woman who calls this island home will be offered the opportunity to grasp and build that new Ireland. but we need to prepare. So now is the time, and there is no room for those that say that we must wait and that now is not the time. Now is the time, and the preparations have to begin. And we look forward to speaking with, debating with, working with, most importantly, everybody from every conceivable background right across the island in delivering the best, the very best that we can be, and the best for the people of this island. So, Arish Gurimila Mahagwiv Galer, thank you so much to Sean McManus, MEP, our man in Brussels, and of course to Chris Hazard in Down, in the beautiful South Down constituency. And above all, thank all of you for being with us for this conversation. We look forward to continuing it on. Did I call you Sean McManus?
You promoted me, Dad, there in the last few.
I am so sorry. Sean McManus. That was a complete reflex. That's a reflex.
If he's watching, he'll be very pleased.
He'll be delighted. Chris, Sean McManus, hello. Hello to all of you in Sligo. And Chris McManus, MEP, thanks so much. Gurimila Mahagwiv Galer, thank you very much, lads. See you all later.